We, we, we have run out of time, but I feel very moved to give an opportunity to the two young gentlemen who've been very patiently waiting there to ask questions. Were the two of you going to ask a question? Maybe in the interest of time, can you both ask it to one after the other, and then we'll see how the panel can respond. But this, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, may have to be the last questions put to the panel. Please.
Good afternoon, guests of honor, distinguished guests and keynote speakers. I am Zihian from MOE's Leadership Development Program. From the ethnic conflicts in the 1960s, Singapore has now managed to achieve racial harmony rather successfully. And this success can partially be attributed to Singapore's stability in terms of politics. However, in the recent general elections and by-elections, other political parties have started to perform much better as compared to the past. And although political stability per se is not the only factor in achieving racial harmony, how would a possible change in the government structure impact racial harmony in Singapore? Thank you.
Okay, and can we have the second question together?
Good afternoon, panel. I'm Brian Chia from MOE LDP. I feel that currently Singapore has still very clearly defined racial lines where different races are still viewed differently. So I would like to question if I think that what Singapore has now is known as religious tolerance and not racial harmony. I mean, racial and religious tolerance. So I'd like to question the panel, has Singapore truly eradicated racism, and how different is racial and religious tolerance from actual racial harmony?
Why don't we poll the audience on this question? Because I think it's interesting, and I know that this is not a representative audience, but how many of us really think, your question, you phrase your question, you say that, have we really achieved racial harmony, right?
As opposed to racial tolerance.
As opposed to racial tolerance, huh? Okay, so that was a question. So how many of us think that we have achieved racial harmony as against more superficial racial tolerance? What's the sense? Who will agree that we have achieved racial harmony beyond racial tolerance? How many of us would think that we are still at the stage of racial tolerance, but not racial harmony? So I think you have your answer. You have your answer, right? Because I think it's about 50-50 split. I mean, people can quibble about what is racial harmony, what is racial tolerance, but I suppose, I interpret racial harmony as a higher order than racial tolerance, right? It's not just superficial. You ask me, I think it's always a work in progress. It's always a work in progress. And from my own limited experience, I spent 20 years in the army, and I think, especially when I was a commander, I was keenly aware of such issues. And I've never taken it for granted that we have arrived. Never. I can share with you some episodes which I have shared publicly before to say that why I'm constantly on my guard and I'm never complacent. 4 days upon taking command of a unit, a battalion of 500 men, 5 Indian soldiers went AWOL, absence without leave. That means they ran away from camp. So I asked them to come back. They say no. I say, why? They say, it's because you are Chinese. You racially discriminate against us. I say, why? I only just been here for 5 days. I don't even know you. How can I racially discriminate against you? If you're naughty, you want to run away from camp, please find another excuse. Don't get me into trouble. Because more than 5 fellow AWOL from camp, you report to the Minister for Defense. No, very serious issue. So how do I solve the problem? Couldn't talk them around. Real story. Couldn't talk them around. To my good fortune, I have a regimental sergeant major, my right-hand man. His name was Patipan. That helps. Patipan went there, sorted them out. They came back to camp. No more racial discrimination issues. But you wonder, no? 5 young men, what's in their mind to claim racial discrimination, right? If you're naughty, you just want to run away from camp, say so, right? But why do you want to claim? But it triggers something in me. that sometimes this can be a convenient cut, even in this day and age, you know. So that cautions me. Just another story I'll tell you. We always celebrate all the major religious holidays. Hari Raya, Diwali, Chinese New Year, whatever. And I remember in my 2 years as a commander, one of the three I was not able to celebrate because of training, operational duty, and so forth. I thought everybody would understand that operational duty comes first, and we'll make it up. But it wasn't exactly so simple. Because the question was, why is it that the other two holidays we could have celebrated it, but why not this one? Why didn't we make the necessary adjustment? Are you culturally insensitive? Serious question. So I never took it for granted, and I need to be very, very careful and sensitive. Sometimes we take our things for granted. Sometimes we do it very well. George Yeo used to tell me that when Singaporeans organize a dinner for different people, different races, different religious groups, we are very sensitive. We know how to organize with halal food, vegetarian food, everything. We do it very naturally. It might seem very simple, but some other countries cannot do it very well. We do it very naturally. And yet we also have our weak spots. But having said that, have we made progress? Yes, I think we have made progress. Recently, there was a sad incident where a Chinese national hijacked a taxi, knocked down an Indian man at a budget terminal. You all remember that incident? It was a very sad case, right? If this had happened 1960s, I think the Singaporeans' reaction would be quite different from what we use today. Today we ignore the incident. It's called a road traffic incident. Someone hijacked a taxi, someone knocked down somebody, we deal with it at that level. But if it was in the 1950s or 1960s, the story could have been different. It would have been a Chinese knocked down an Indian, and the consequences are quite different. If you look back at how the riots were started in the 1960s, it was through a seemingly innocuous event. But that shows that we have made progress. But we've made progress in good times. We live in relatively peaceful time. The competition is not so tough, as in we need to harm each other to get ahead. So we are in good state. But will we always be like that? I don't know. I hope so. But we need to work very hard to make sure that we will be like that. Because hope is not a method, right? So we need to work very hard. We need to work very, very hard. Just as a check, how many Indian friends do you have? How many Malay friends do you have? It's probably an unfair question, right? Because you just have friends. You have Singaporean friends. That is good. But having said that, that is good that you don't count your friends whether by race, by Malay, Indian, or whatever other groups that might be. But you must also be sensitive that all of us do have a slightly different background. And that, I think, is something that we have to be sensitive. Just looking at the audience, you look at us, we all come from different race, different religion, different background. It's a very unnatural setting, you know. Many countries, when they take a picture and see this, very unnatural. I don't know whether you monitor Hirish Kumar's comment in Parliament last week. He said that he was walking in Bangkok with his friend. Wanted to buy a drink on a hot day. The Thai, as they were approaching the Thai storekeeper looked at them. Hey, you, Singaporean. Hirish Kumar said, whoa, how you know? The Thai storekeeper said, different color, walk together, Singaporean. That says a lot, right? That says a lot. But that takes tremendous effort, you know. Tremendous effort, right? And we must get out of our comfort zone to get to know people from different backgrounds. And just now, I think one of the points mentioned was that actually it's human tendency, it's natural human tendency to be in our comfort zone, to stay amongst people whom we are comfortable with, either of the same language, the same race, the same religion, and so forth. We have to make that effort to break out of this, to make sure that we continuously challenge ourselves to get to know somebody from a different background. And that, I think, is the true meaning of being an inclusive society, right? Because if we don't, then it will slide backwards very easily, very easily. It's not easy, no, just to go and get to know somebody of a different background. It's against human nature, against human nature.
Thank you, Minister. We unfortunately must come to an end for today's dialogue and our seminar. It is with deep regret because I really wish we still had another 14 hours and 15 minutes to hit 15 hours. But perhaps in closing, let's just consider the very insightful and informative comments made by our speakers and by Minister in particular. We aspire to go on. We are now working towards our 50th year as a nation. Perhaps we can aspire to move towards our 1000th year as a nation, as the generations of Singaporeans go on. But here is where comes the strength and the importance of our fellow community leaders here, because it is with our community leaders that we can explain situations and we can be the glue that binds our community together. Today we had an interesting theme of securing peace, lessons from history. And I noticed that Ambassador Yaacob, when he made his comments, he also said that history is the teacher of life. In many ways, we need to learn from the past, but as grassroots leaders, as community leaders, it is also incumbent upon us to shine the torch into the future. That those who work with us and live with us as residents, regardless of race, language, or religion, they see hope and they know that Singapore indeed can be their home. It doesn't matter if they do come and they are new citizens who join us. As S. Rajaratnam used to say, it's not a matter of just heritage, it's choice and it's conviction. We welcome them as our brothers and our sisters, so long as they're willing to contribute to our Singapore that we call home and sacrifice for us even if it's necessary. And I think in the words of Yaacob, Ambassador Yaacob again, and I love that word and I hope I remember it, La Benevolencia, if I pronounced it correctly, a city of goodwill. And I think on that note, if we can all close with that great aspiration and that promise that Singapore will continue to be that city of goodwill. It just leaves me to thank our panel, all panel members, Minister, and especially our guest from Bosnia who has come all this way. Ambassador Yaacob, you would have heard the phrase a few times today, the Singapore Rojak. Well, Ramesh, could I ask that before Ambassador leaves Singapore and he enjoys his time in Singapore, that you at least show him how he's heard about the Singapore Rojak, now allow him to eat the Singapore Rojak. Thank you all. Have a good weekend ahead.